This is Damascus Radio. Now stay tuned for the news. Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. In our news bulletin for tonight, huge masses of the people took to the streets just after Speaker of the People's Assembly Mohammed Shahid al-Ham announced that Dr. Bashar al-Assad has won the post of president for a new constitutional term. Demonstrations celebrating the victory were held in Idlib, Syria, Latakia, and Damascus provinces. Chief of the High Judicial Committee for Elections, Judge Hisham al-Sha'ar, had earlier said that all ballot boxes were closed at all centres in Syria on Tuesday, June the 3rd at 12 midnight, adding that the Electoral Committee started to count votes. The Higher Judicial Committee for Elections had earlier decided to extend voting 5 extra hours, pushing closing time to midnight at all plotting centres due to the remarkable heavy turnout. Chairman of the committee, Hisham al-Sha'ar, has affirmed that no problems whatsoever have been reported so far during the balloting process ongoing in Syria. Touring a number of polling stations in Damascus along with the committee's members, al-Sha'ar pointed to a heavy turnout by voters in the presidential polling, which started early this morning and stressed that no disturbances have been reported. Representatives of the foreign delegations observing Syria's presidential elections have stressed that the voting process in Syria's presidential elections was fair and marked by high turnout. The representatives were speaking during consultative meetings of the parliamentarians, independent figures and NGOs who came to Syria upon the People's Assembly's invitation to oversee how the balloting ran. The concluding statement of the meeting hailed the elections for being held on time and according to the constitutional schedule in a democratic, transparent and fair atmosphere. The delegations viewed the high voter turnout at home and abroad as a proof of the Syrian people's preference for the political option to any violent solution. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has stressed that the backers of the terrorist Takfiri groups in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran and some other Arab countries are the main enemies of the region's countries. Khamenei's words came during the 25th anniversary of the passing of the late founder of the Islamic Republic, Imam Khomeini, on Wednesday. Details on the following report.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has stressed that the backers of the terrorist Takfiri groups in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran and some other Arab countries are the main enemies of the region's countries. In a speech at the 25th anniversary of the passing of the late founder of the Islamic Republic, Imam Khomeini, on Wednesday, Khamenei said that the US has created and planted armed terrorist groups in those countries and has been supplying them with all forms of support, financially and militarily, to sow discord and differences among their peoples. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani also delivered a speech on the occasion in which he said that the West, which claims to have civilization and boasts about rejecting terrorism, supports and backs the armed terrorist groups militarily and financially in Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, among other countries as well. He added that the conspirators began their schemes against Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan and some other Islamic states with the aim of fragmenting these countries. He said, Iran struggles in the region and the world to combat terrorism in word and deed, and it substantially backs those who fight terrorism and extremism in the region. Rouhani stressed that Iran is hoisting the flag of combating terrorism and extremism in the region, and through unity and faith will it triumph in all fields and defend the legitimate rights of the people.
Terrorists fired mortar shells on Jaramana city in Damascus countryside, killing 1 citizen and injuring 3 others. A source of the police command told Sana that terrorists fired 5 mortar shells on Al-Rawda and other areas, neighborhoods, claiming the life of a citizen and injuring 3 others, in addition to causing material damage to a number of houses, shops and cars. A fresh wave of terrorist mortar shells have meanwhile targeted Damascus city today, injuring 6 civilians. Meanwhile, more armed terrorist groups were eliminated across the country and their weapons and hideouts were destroyed as a result of the Army's operations today. A military source told Sana that Army units confronted an attempt by armed terrorist groups to attack al-Shakura village from al-Restan and at Talbisa in Homs countryside, killing a number of terrorists and injuring others. Other army units foiled armed terrorist groups' infiltration attempts from Dar al-Kabira town at Duira village and eliminated a number of terrorists and destroyed a car loaded with weapons in al-Ghanto village. In Dar al-Balad, a military source said that all members of an armed terrorist groups were killed in an ambush to the north of Al Yarmouk school. The army units also foiled an armed terrorist group's infiltration attempt into a building to the northeast of Al-Masri's roundabout, killing and injuring a number of terrorists. In Latakia, army units carried out operations against armed terrorist groups in the villages of Sadqat al-Kar and As-Sawa and Al-Furlok, killing 34 terrorists and injuring others, in addition to destroying 3 cannons, rocket launchers, 9 cars equipped with heavy machine guns, and 3 cars loaded with rockets. First Attorney General in Aleppo, Ibrahim, announced today that the authorities have decided to release 300 prisoners from Aleppo Central Prison. In a statement to Sana reporter, Al-Hilal said that the decision came after forming 2 judicial committees to study the situations of the prisoners at President Bashar al-Assad's directives. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that any attempt to politicize the humanitarian crisis in Syria and exploit it to justify forceful foreign interference are non-constructive and futile. In a message to the participants in the Russian-Palestinian Orthodox Association Conference on Tuesday, relayed by his deputy Mikhail Bogdanov, Lavrov noted that Moscow has vetoed 4 attempts to pass resolutions at the Security Council that attempted to exploit the humanitarian issue to pave the way for foreign military intervention in Syria. He said that the eyes of the international community are now turned to the armed conflict in Syria, which is claiming lives, destroying social and economic infrastructure, and displaces hundreds of citizens due to the crimes of the armed groups every day. The minister said that Russia is exerting diligent efforts to put an end to the violence in Syria as soon as possible and reach a political solution by resuming talks in Geneva, emphasizing the importance of confronting the extremists and terrorists whose activity in Syria is increasing. Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, on his part, has said that Russia will oppose a draft resolution proposed by Australia, Jordan and Luxembourg and backed by the US, France and Britain on the humanitarian situation in Syria under the Chapter 8 of the UN Charters. Answering a question on whether Russia is ready to vote on a draft resolution on the humanitarian issue in Syria under Chapter 8 in return for backing a rival Russian draft resolution on Ukraine, Churkin said there is no connection between the 2 issues, adding that threatening Syria with this chapter that would allow for military intervention would hinder cooperation in the humanitarian field. A report by Russia Today website, Churkin reiterated that Russia will continue working on its draft resolution, or decision in fact, on Syria with regard to supporting national reconciliation in it. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will discuss with his U.S. counterpart John Kerry the Syrian-Ukrainian crisis in Paris tomorrow. According to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, Lavrov is due to meet Kerry in Paris on the 5th of this month over the Ukrainian and the Syrian issues. Ryabkov said if a convergence about these 2 issues occurs, it will be a big success, pointing out that the results of the discussions are completely dependent on the U.S. partners. Russia has announced that it will not propose any initiative for a no-fly zone over east of Ukraine at the Security Council at this stage, as it will not be supported by the Western countries. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Gennady Gatilov said that the Security Council did establish such zones in Bosnia, Iraq and Libya, but it did not bring a long-term political solution to those countries. Gatilov asserted that Moscow considers that its main mission is to stop the escalating violence east of Ukraine. Therefore, it submitted a humanitarian draft resolution to the Security Council about Ukraine. And our final item said, ladies and gentlemen, United Arab Emirates Health Minister Abdurrahman Al-Awais has announced 10 death cases in the United Arab Emirates by the coronavirus, the Middle East respiratory syndrome, since the outbreak of the disease. During a deliberation with members of the Federal National Council, al-Awais clarified that 68 corona infection cases have been registered in the UAE since the first diagnosed case in March 2013. It is to be noted that the World Health Organization, following an urgent meeting about corona in Geneva last month, has pointed to the big increase of the corona infection cases as a result of the preventive measures' weakness to control the infection. And that's the end of the news. Thank you for listening.
Damascus Radio presents News and Views.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The Syrians' participation in the elections is a victory over the conspiracy, as the conspirators betting on Syria have collapsed, thanks to the successes of the Syrian army and the steadfastness of the Syrian people in confronting the global conspiracy hatched with the aim of implementing a Zionist project in the region and ending resistance axis against Israel. Syria is in fact targeted for its adherence to the national stances and its rejection of any foreign interference in its internal affairs. The West is targeting all countries which do not abide by the Western dictations, but the steadfastness of the Syrians and their unity behind their leadership and army have foiled all plots and schemes against their homeland. There is no democracy without patriotism and loyalty, and here comes the need to preserve national sovereignty and eradicate terrorism, which has been exported to Syria from more than 83 states with the aim of achieving certain political and economic objectives, which remind us of the colonialist era at the beginning of the 20th century, when France and Britain divided the Arab countries between them as if these countries were their inheritance. Through casting votes and participating in the ballots, the Syrians are conveying a clear message to the entire world that they are committed to the safety and security of their homeland and are prepared to defend the country's sovereignty and independence decisions, despite the sacrifices they will offer for the sake of the independence of their homeland and the dignity of their people. Syrians' participation in the elections express their strong belief in their leadership, army, and the bright future of their homeland.
That was News and Views from Damascus Radio. Damascus Radio presents Syrian Local Press Review.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Today's newspapers issued in Damascus highlighted the following topic of presidential elections. Chief of the Higher Judicial Committee for Elections, Judge Hisham Sha'ar, said that all ballot boxes were closed at all centers in Syria at 12 midnight, adding that the election committee started to count votes. Presidential candidate Dr. Bashar al-Assad and his wife had earlier cast their votes for presidential elections at Marta Naim Masrani School in Al-Malki neighborhood in Damascus. Senior Ashley Syrian officials also headed to the polling stations at various state institutions to cast their ballots in the elections to choose a president for Syria. Speaker of the People's Assembly Mohammed Jihad Laham cast his vote at the voting center in the Assembly's building, accompanied by Chairman of the National Security and Foreign Policy Committee at the Iranian Shura Council, Head of the Iranian-Syrian Friendship Association, Alaaddin Rajordi, who is at the top of an Iranian delegation observing the election process at Syria's invitation. The Speaker Laham said, Syria's citizens have said their word outside Syria, and now they are saying it inside. On his part, Rajordi stressed that the Syrian Arab people are voting freely and they will choose the president and decide Syria's destiny pointing out that the United States will not be able to threaten Syria after this step because the Syrian people rallied around the President of the Republic and they will not allow any foreign intervention in Syria's affairs. He said Syria, by holding its presidential elections, is passing through a stage of political process and success and resounding defeat of the U.S. military strategy. Prime Minister al-Halaqi said at the polling center of the cabinet headquarters that today is historical in the Syrians' lives and the Syrian people's will is the one to determine the future of the country. Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Expatriate Minister Walid Muallim cast vote for the presidential election at the Cabinet Election Center. He said, "No one grants legitimacy except the Syrian people," hailing the Syrian people's massive turnout to the ballot boxes. Minister of Information Omran Zorbi, in his part, upon casting his vote, expressed hope that the voting process would constitute a genuine preface for reconstruction process. 3 aircraft from the Syrian Arab Airlines arrived in Damascus International Airport carrying members of the Syrian community in Kuwait to participate in the presidential elections in coordination with the Foreign and Expatriate Ministry. And delegations from Russia, Iran, Democratic Korea, Pakistan, Canada, and the US, Venezuela, Brazil, and Bolivia had been observing the presidential elections process at polling stations in various provinces.
That was a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning.
Damascus Radio presents Palestine Forever in Mind. A weekly program prepared to you by Khaled Qais and read by Lama Saif. Hunger-striking Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails say they will continue their strike despite being in critical health conditions. The prisoners were receiving emergency treatment to recover. 40 Palestinian prisoners whose hunger strike has entered its second month were hospitalized after developing severe health conditions. Palestinian Authority officials have said that the prisoners will not end the strike until Israel abandons its administrative detention policy. Isa Korkari, the Palestinian Minister for Prisoners Affairs, said that the sum of hunger strikers are in very grave conditions, adding, most are vomiting blood and fainting. They cannot walk. They are in a terrible pain. The Palestinian official added that the Israeli prison authorities would not care even if the prisoners died. He called on the United Nations Security Council to move against what he called Israel's intransigence. A few days ago, dozens more Palestinian prisoners joined in, demanding an end to Israel's arbitrary administrative detention of Palestinians. More than 120 Palestinian prisoners have been on an open-end hunger strike since April 24th in protest at the Israeli administrative detention, which is a sort of imprisonment without trial or charge that allows Israel to incarcerate Palestinians for up to 6 months. The detention order can be renewed for indefinite periods of time. More than 5,000 Palestinians are reportedly being held in Israeli prisons, nearly 200 of them under administrative detention detention orders. Meanwhile, Israeli forces have shot and injured at least 4 Palestinian worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Local sources say clashes erupted at the mosque compound when Palestinian worshippers protested the presence of Israeli extremists in the holy Islamic site. Israelis were commemorating the Jerusalem Day, which marks the anniversary of Israel's capture of East Al-Quds, Jerusalem in 1967. Witnesses said Israeli forces fired stun grenades and rubber bullets at Palestinian protesters. A number of worshippers were reportedly pepper sprayed. The Al-Aqsa Mosque has been the scene of clashes in recent months, following frequent visits by Israeli settlers and officials to the holy site. Israel is facing mounting pressure to rein in a spiraling wave of the hate crimes by Israeli, mainly in the form of vandalism and targeting mosques and churches. This comes as Israeli authorities are systematically acting to change East Al-Quds' identity and character. Meanwhile, a report published by the Al-Aqsa Foundation in October said that the Israeli regime is planning to build a synagogue in Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as part of its efforts to further Judaize the occupied Palestinian territories. Over the past decades, Israel has tried to change the demographic makeup of Al-Aqsa by constructing illegal settlements, destroying historical sites, and expelling the local Palestinian population. Palestine forever in mind. A weekly program prepared to you by Khaled Qais and read by Lama Saif.
You are still tuned to the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic, Damascus Radio. Before signing off with the Syrian national anthem, here is another look at the news summary. Huge masses of people take to the streets to celebrate Dr. Bashar al-Assad's winning the post of president for a new constitutional term. Chief of the Higher Judicial Committee for Elections, Judge Hisham Sha'ar, says that all ballot boxes were closed in Syria on Tuesday, June the 3rd at midnight. Representatives of the foreign delegations observing Syria's presidential elections stressed that the voting process in Syria's presidential elections was fair and marked by high turnout. Iran's supreme leader, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, stresses that the backers of the terrorist Takfiri groups in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan and Iran are the main enemies of the region's countries. More armed terrorist groups are eliminated across the country and their weapons and hideouts destroyed during the army's operations in Homs, Deir al-Balad and Latakia. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that any attempts to politicize the humanitarian crisis in Syria to justify foreign interference are non-constructive and futile. Meanwhile, Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, stresses that Russia will oppose a draft resolution proposed by Australia, Jordan, Luxembourg and backed by the US, France and Britain on the humanitarian situation in Syria under Chapter 8 of the UN Charters. And the United Arab Emirates Health Minister announces 10 death cases in United Arab Emirates by the coronavirus. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of an English transmission for tonight. You can join us again tomorrow at the same time and the same frequencies. Until then, this is Damascus Radio with all staff members wishing you all the best and a very good night.